During the Second World War, the United States military possessed one code that the enemy never broke, not once, not partially, not ever. The finest cryptographers in Imperial Japan, men who had cracked other American ciphers, threw everything they had at it and failed completely. After the war, a Japanese intelligence chief admitted that this one code had defeated them utterly. But here is the secret: it was not a code in the ordinary sense at all. It was a language, a Native American language, spoken by men the United States government had spent decades trying to erase. This is the astonishing, and deeply ironic, story of the Code Talkers, the Native Americans who took the languages a nation had tried to beat out of their grandparents, and used them to help win 2 world wars. The story begins not in World War II but in World War I, in the trenches of France in 1918. The American army had a desperate problem. The Germans were tapping their field telephone lines and breaking their codes, so that orders were known to the enemy almost as soon as they were given. Then an officer overheard 2 soldiers from the Choctaw Nation talking in their own language and had an idea. The army gathered a group of Choctaw soldiers and put them on the phone lines, transmitting orders in Choctaw. The Germans, listening in, were utterly baffled. They had no idea what they were hearing. The Choctaw Telephone Squad helped the American forces win key engagements in the final push of the war. It was the birth of an idea that would prove decisive a generation later. The Choctaw experiment worked so well, and so quickly, that the Germans reportedly captured some of the transmissions and were left completely helpless. Their codebreakers, among the best in the world, could not even identify what language they were hearing, let alone translate it. Within days of the Choctaw going on the lines, the tide of local engagements shifted, because the enemy had lost its window into American plans. The war ended weeks later, before the idea could be fully developed, and the Choctaw Code Talkers returned home to little recognition, like so many who would follow them. But they had proven something momentous, that a Native American language, in the mouths of Native American soldiers, was a cipher no enemy could break. A generation later, when the world went to war again, that proof would be remembered and built into one of the great secret weapons of the 20th century. Between the wars, the idea lay mostly forgotten, but the deep irony was already in place, and it is essential to understand it. In these very decades, the United States government was running a brutal campaign to destroy native languages. Native children were taken from their families and sent to boarding schools where speaking their own language was forbidden and punished. Children were beaten, had their mouths washed out with soap, were humiliated for speaking the words their parents had taught them. The entire policy was designed to erase these languages from the earth within a generation. And then, when war came again, the government would turn to those same languages as a secret weapon, and ask the sons of the punished to save American lives with the words the schools had tried to beat out of them. When the United States entered World War II, the idea was revived, and it was a Marine named Philip Johnston who championed its greatest form. Johnston was not Navajo, but he had grown up on the Navajo reservation as the son of a missionary and spoke the language, and he knew it was almost uniquely suited to the task. Navajo is extraordinarily complex, with a grammar and tonal system so difficult that virtually no outsider ever learned it. It was essentially unwritten and unknown outside the Navajo world. In 1942, Johnston demonstrated the concept to the Marine Corps, showing that Navajo speakers could encode, transmit, and decode a military message far faster than the coding machines of the day, and in a form no enemy could crack. The Marines were convinced. The Navajo Code Talker program was born. The first 29 Navajo recruits did something remarkable. They did not just speak their language on the radio, they built a real code inside it. Working together, these young men created a military vocabulary from scratch. Because Navajo had no words for modern military equipment, they invented them using natural imagery from their own world. A fighter plane became a hummingbird. A bomber was a buzzard. A submarine was an iron fish. A tank was a tortoise. Battleship was whale. They built an alphabet, too, so they could spell out any word. Each English letter was represented by a Navajo word, and its first sound gave the letter. So even a Navajo speaker who overheard the code, without knowing the system, would hear only a strange, disconnected string of words about animals and everyday things. It was a code within a language within a language. Consider why Navajo in particular was so perfectly unbreakable, because the reasons are fascinating. First, it was spoken by relatively few people and was almost entirely unwritten. There were no Navajo dictionaries or grammars in circulation for an enemy to study. Second, the language is genuinely, ferociously complex. It is tonal, so the same syllable means completely different things depending on pitch, its verbs are built from intricate systems of prefixes, and its sounds are difficult for non-speakers even to hear correctly, let alone reproduce. Linguists estimated that only a tiny handful of non-Navajo people anywhere on Earth had any command of it, and none of them were in the German or Japanese military. On top of that natural difficulty, the code talkers layered their invented military vocabulary, so even a fluent Navajo speaker would have been lost. It was, in effect, a secret code hidden inside one of the hardest languages in the world. The code talkers also had to memorize everything, and that was a weapon in itself. There were no code books carried into battle that could be captured, no cipher machines that could fall into enemy hands. The entire code lived in the men's minds, drilled into memory until it was instant and flawless. A code talker had to hold the full dictionary of terms and the letter alphabet in his head and use them under the worst conditions imaginable, exhausted, terrified, under artillery fire, with lives depending on split-second accuracy. They trained relentlessly until the translation was automatic. This meant there was quite literally nothing physical for the enemy to steal or crack. The code could not be captured because it was not written anywhere. It existed only in the disciplined memories of the young Navajo Marines who carried it. There was one danger the code talkers faced that no other Marines did, and it is heartbreaking. On the chaotic Pacific battlefields, some code talkers were mistaken by their own side for enemy soldiers, because to American troops who did not know them, these dark-haired men speaking a strange, unrecognizable language on the radio could be taken for the enemy. Some were detained by fellow Americans. There are accounts of code talkers being held at gunpoint by suspicious soldiers until an officer could vouch for them. Several were assigned personal bodyguards, fellow Marines whose job, by some grim accounts, was as much to protect the code talker's secret as his life. These men risked being killed by friend as well as foe, all while performing a service most of the men around them did not even know was happening. The result was a communications system of astonishing speed and security. A Navajo code talker could receive a 3-line English message, translated in his head into the coded Navajo, transmit it by radio, and have another code talker on the far end decode it back into English accurately in around 20 seconds. The coding machines of the era took 30 minutes to do the same work. It was faster and more secure than any machine. And it was, for all practical purposes, unbreakable. To crack it, an enemy would need a fluent speaker of Navajo, one of only a handful of non-Navajo people on Earth who also somehow knew the secret code layered on top. The Japanese had neither. They recorded the strange sounds and could make nothing of them at all. The Navajo code talkers served in the bloodiest battles of the Pacific, and they were there from the beginning, at Guadalcanal, and through the terrible island campaigns that followed. They landed with the Marines under fire, carried their heavy radios up the beaches, and transmitted the vital messages of battled troop movements, artillery targets, supply requests, casualty reports in the thick of combat. The signal officer of one Marine division stated flatly that the code talkers were essential. The messages had to get through, and only the code talkers could send them with the speed and security the fighting demanded. They worked under fire, exhausted and terrified like all the men around them, and they did not fail. Their language, carried across the radio waves of the Pacific, became one of the most reliable weapons the Marines possessed. The supreme test came at Iwo Jima in 1945, one of the most savage battles in the history of the Marine Corps. In the first 2 days of that assault, 6 Navajo code talkers worked around the clock, sending and receiving over 800 messages without a single error. Every message that guided the artillery, coordinated the movements, and called in the support in those desperate opening hours passed through the code. A Marine signal officer at Iwo Jima later said it simply, were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima. In the fire and chaos of that black volcanic island, where thousands of men died, the words of a language the government had tried to destroy helped win the battle. There is no more powerful testament to what the code talkers achieved. And it was not only the Navajo. The idea spread across the war, drawing on many nations. A group of Comanche code talkers went ashore in the D-Day landings at Normandy, using their language against the Germans in Europe. With their own invented terms, they called Hitler a crazy white man and a tank a turtle. Soldiers from the Meskwaki, the Hopi, the Cree, the Assiniboine, and other nations served as code talkers in various theaters. In total, members of around 20 different native nations used their languages to carry secret communications for the United States across 2 world wars. It was a contribution spread across the entire native world, dozens of languages, each one a weapon the enemy could not break, wielded by the descendants of the peoples America had tried hardest to erase. It is worth asking why so many native men volunteered at all, why they fought so willingly for a country that had treated their peoples so badly. The answer says something profound about native cultures. For many nations, the warrior tradition ran deep. To defend the homeland, and America was still the homeland. Whatever the government had done was a sacred duty and a path to honor. Native Americans volunteered and served in the world wars at rates higher, proportionally, than almost any other group in the country. They fought for their families, for their communities, for the land itself, and out of a warrior's code older than the United States. That a people could be so wronged by a nation and still send their sons to defend it in such numbers is one of the quiet marvels of this history, an act of loyalty to the land that transcended the government sitting on it. Now the part that should make every listener angry. When the war ended, the code talkers came home and were told to say nothing. The Navajo Code was kept classified for over 20 years, in case it might be needed again, which meant the code talkers could not tell anyone what they had done. They received no special recognition, no medals, no public thanks. These men who had served with such distinction returned to a country that still, in many places, denied Native Americans basic rights. Some could not even vote in their own states. They went back to the reservation, to poverty and discrimination, their heroism a secret they were forbidden to share. For decades, the men who had helped win the war in the Pacific lived unknown and unhonored, carrying their extraordinary achievement in silence. Recognition came, but it came late, shamefully late. The Navajo Code was finally declassified in 1968, and slowly the story began to emerge. It took until 1982 for the code talkers to receive national acknowledgement, and until 2001, nearly 60 years after the events, when many were already gone, for the original 29 Navajo code talkers to be awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest civilian honor Congress can bestow, with silver medals for those who followed. Presidents praised them, a feature film told a version of their story, monuments were raised. The men who had waited a lifetime in silence were, at last, called what they had always been, heroes. But many had not lived to hear it, and the long delay remains a stain, a nation slow to honor the very people whose gift it had once tried to destroy. So remember the code talkers, because their story holds a truth as sharp as any in this history. The United States spent decades in untold cruelty trying to wipe native languages from the earth, punishing children for every word of Navajo or Comanche or Choctaw they spoke. And then, in its hour of greatest need, that same nation was saved, again and again, by those exact languages, wielded by the children of the punished, in the deadliest battles of the century. The words the schools tried to beat into silence carried the messages that won battles and saved thousands of American lives. The code talkers answered a country that had wronged them with a service it could never have bought or forced, and they did it in the language of their ancestors. Next on this channel, the true story of Pocahontas that Disney erased. Subscribe, and keep learning the history they left out.